Did you know that one of the most infamous murder cases in American history has just resurfaced in the headlines after more than 3 decades? On a quiet night in Beverly Hills in 1989, the lives of José and Kitty Menendez came to a sudden and brutal end inside their own mansion. Their killers were not strangers, not masked intruders, but their very own sons, Lyle and Erik Menendez. The moment this detail came out, America was left stunned. How could 2 young men from wealth, privilege, and a seemingly perfect family background commit such an unthinkable crime? For years, the story was told as one of greed, money, and power. But as the case evolved, disturbing secrets came to the surface. Claims of abuse, manipulation, and hidden family horrors. And now, with recent developments in August 2025, this chilling story is back at the center of national attention. On the surface, the Menendez family had it all. José Menendez was a wealthy entertainment executive, a man who had built his fortune through hard work and ruthless ambition. His wife, Kitty, was a former beauty queen turned devoted mother. Their sons, Lyle and Erik, lived in a Beverly Hills mansion, drove luxury cars, and attended private schools. To the outside world, this family embodied the American dream. But behind those mansion doors, something darker was brewing. Friends and neighbors described tension, arguments, and strict discipline. Rumors of control and fear whispered beneath the polished image. Still, no one could have predicted what would happen next. On a warm August night in 1989, the quiet calm of Beverly Hills was shattered inside one of its most luxurious mansions. Behind those perfectly polished gates, 2 brothers sat in their living room while their parents, José and Kitty Menendez, settled down after dinner. Nothing about the setting suggested violence. The house was immaculate, the neighborhood silent, the world outside unsuspecting of what was about to happen. Yet within minutes, the night transformed from ordinary to unforgettable. Suddenly, the sharp blast of a shotgun echoed through the mansion's halls. José, the powerful Hollywood executive who seemed untouchable, was hit first. Kitty, shocked and terrified, barely had a moment to react before more shots rang out. The crime was swift, brutal, and merciless, leaving 2 bodies lifeless on the floor of their own home. The killers didn't flee immediately, but carefully crafted a cover story, one that would send investigators spinning for months. When the police arrived, the brothers claimed they had discovered their parents already murdered. They wept, they acted devastated, they played the role of grieving sons. And at first it worked. The scene appeared to suggest a possible mob-style hit. Who would suspect that the very children of the victims had carried out such an unthinkable act? The idea seemed too cruel, too disturbing to even consider. But behind the stage sorrow lingered a chilling truth. The brothers had not just lost their parents, they were the ones who had pulled the triggers. Yet the question loomed heavily: why? These were not impoverished sons desperate for survival. They were young men of privilege with wealth, status, and every opportunity at their fingertips. What could drive them to destroy the very people who gave them that life? The neighbors whispered. The media speculated. And the investigators dug deeper, baffled by the sheer brutality of the crime. 2 parents slaughtered in their own home by the people they should have trusted most. Was it cold-blooded greed, a desire to inherit millions? Or was there a darker, more hidden story buried within the walls of that mansion? That night, a family name that once represented success and power would become forever associated with murder. And from the moment those shotgun blasts echoed through Beverly Hills, the Menendez case was destined to haunt America for decades to come. The investigation took a strange turn in the months that followed. At first, detectives were convinced the murders had been the work of professionals. José Menendez was a wealthy executive with powerful connections in Hollywood and beyond. A mob-style execution seemed plausible. Yet as weeks passed, no evidence pointed to organized crime. Instead, suspicion began to circle back toward the 2 young men who had played the role of grieving sons. Their behavior in the aftermath raised unsettling questions. Instead of disappearing quietly into mourning, the brothers immersed themselves in a life of extravagance. They bought luxury cars, expensive watches, and spent staggering amounts of money on clothes and travel. It was as if the tragedy had become their ticket to a new lifestyle, one funded by the inheritance of their slain parents. Detectives began to wonder, was this grief or guilt disguised by indulgence? Still, prosecutors had no confession, no direct evidence linking them to the crime. That changed when the brothers started therapy. In what was meant to be a private space hidden away from the world, a terrible truth slipped out. Lyle and Erik confessed to their psychologist that they had been the ones to pull the triggers that night. The words were not meant to escape the office walls, yet fate had other plans. When their psychologist's girlfriend learned of the secret, she went to the police. Suddenly, what had been whispers of suspicion turned into a case ready for trial. But this was not just any trial. When proceedings began, the courtroom became a stage and the nation became its audience. For the first time in American history, a trial of such magnitude was televised daily, transforming the Menendez brothers into household names. As cameras rolled, the brothers did not deny their actions. They admitted to killing their parents, but they claimed it had not been out of greed or selfishness. Instead, they told a story darker than anyone had expected. Allegations of years of abuse hidden behind the perfect facade of a Beverly Hills family. The narrative shocked viewers. Were these cold-blooded killers driven by money, or broken sons trapped in a cycle of torment and fear? The trial left the nation divided. Some saw monsters, others saw victims, but one undeniable fact remained. The Menendez case was no longer just about murder. It was about the secrets a family hides and the devastating cost of bringing them into the light. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom was no longer just a place of judgment. It became a theater of secrets. When the Menendez brothers finally revealed the motive behind the murders, the narrative shifted from wealth and greed to something far darker. They claimed they had not acted out of ambition, but out of desperation. Behind the walls of their Beverly Hills mansion, they alleged, lay years of abuse that no one outside the family had ever seen. The brothers painted a picture of a home that looked perfect on the surface, but was rotting underneath. José Menendez, the powerful Hollywood executive, was accused of being a violent and controlling father. Kitty, their mother, was described as fragile and complicit, unwilling to protect them. The brothers testified about years of physical and psychological torment, and most disturbingly, they alleged ongoing sexual abuse that pushed them into a constant state of fear. According to their defense, the murders were not planned acts of greed, but the desperate reaction of sons who believed that their lives were in imminent danger. The allegation shocked the nation. Viewers at home, watching every detail unfold on television, struggled to process the possibility. Could two privileged young men, living in a mansion in Beverly Hills, really have been the victims of such horrific abuse? Or was this simply an elaborate attempt to twist the narrative and escape the harshest punishment? The prosecution was quick to counter. They argued that the brothers were lying, that the story of abuse was nothing more than a calculated attempt to justify the unjustifiable. They pointed to the luxury purchases made after the murders, the expensive shopping sprees, the sudden appetite for wealth. To them, it was clear this was about money, not survival. But the more the trial continued, the more divided the public became. Some viewers felt genuine sympathy, believing the brothers had lived through unimaginable trauma. Others felt outraged, seeing nothing but manipulation from cold-blooded killers. And through it all, one thing was undeniable. The case had become bigger than a crime. It was now a national conversation about abuse, privilege, family secrets, and the thin line between victim and perpetrator. For the jury, the weight of truth became impossible to ignore. Were these sons confessing to a crime of greed, or revealing a hidden nightmare no one had ever dared to imagine? The day of the verdict arrived, and the world held its breath. For months, the Menendez brothers' trial had been a national obsession, a strange mix of tragedy and spectacle broadcast into living rooms across America. But now everything came down to a single decision. Would the jury believe the brothers' story of abuse, or would they see them as greedy killers who murdered their own parents for wealth? The courtroom was silent as the jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and the brothers sat frozen, waiting for their fate. When the foreman spoke, it became clear how deeply conflicted the case had become. The first trial ended not with justice, but with deadlock. The jury could not agree. Some believed the abuse was real and the killings were acts of fear. Others believed the abuse claims were fabricated, a desperate ploy to escape the death penalty. The result, a mistrial. But the story did not end there. Prosecutors were determined to try again, and in the second trial, the strategy shifted. This time, cameras were banned from the courtroom, and the focus was placed squarely on the brutal nature of the killings. The defense's narrative of abuse was allowed, but it no longer dominated the case as it had before. Jurors now saw the crime for what it was on paper. Two young men armed with shotguns firing multiple rounds into their parents at close range. And when the second verdict was read, the conclusion was very different. Lyle and Erik Menendez were both found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom was tense, but there was no shock, only the heavy silence of a nation that had finally received its answer. The sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. For some, justice had been served. The image of two entitled heirs eliminating their parents for money was too strong to ignore. For others, it felt incomplete. If the brothers' allegations were true, then prison would not just be punishment. It would be a lifelong reminder of the abuse they claimed to have endured. Either way, the Menendez case had cemented itself in American history as one of the most sensational trials of the 1990s, leaving behind more questions than answers. More than 3 decades later, the Menendez case still refuses to fade into silence. The brothers remain behind bars, serving life sentences without the chance of parole. But outside prison walls, their story continues to stir debate. For some, they are nothing more than cold-blooded killers who executed their parents in a calculated act of greed. For others, they are tragic figures, children who grew up in a gilded cage, victims of abuse who saw no way out but through violence. Subscribe to Mystery Note for more chilling crime stories that still haunt the world.